Hello, I'm Caroline Boulard. I founded 2 companies in the field of data visualization. For over 10 years, I've been working to create connections between people and data. We're here together for a new episode of The Bridge, the Artefacts media that democratizes data and artificial intelligence culture for the greater good. And today we're welcoming Justine Nerce. Hello, Justine.
Hello.
Justine, could you introduce yourself and tell us about what you do?
Of course. I'm Justine Nerce. I'm currently a managing partner at Artefact. I joined Artefact almost 10 years ago at the very beginning of the company. Back then there were about 30 of us. Just to remind you, today there are 1,500 of us. I've experienced the entire Artefact adventure from the very beginning. Over the past 10 years, I've had the opportunity to grow and take on several different roles. I had the opportunity to be, the lead for a major Artefact account, one of our biggest clients in the industry, especially in telecoms. I also had the opportunity to create our entire offering around data governance, which I developed in France and internationally, and which we are now rolling out to several of our clients. And more recently, for the past 3 or 4 years, I've been in charge of developing the healthcare industry for Artefact in France and internationally.
Could you please tell us the fascinating story of the healthcare industry, specifically within Artefact for us?
Of course, the pharmaceutical industry is a relatively new sector for Artefact. As I mentioned, we started developing it on a large scale about 4 or 5 years ago. We had been working with players in the pharmaceutical industry since our beginnings, since Artefact was founded in 2016, but more on the consumer healthcare side. That is for example, all the departments within pharmaceutical companies that are responsible for selling the medications you can buy at the pharmacy over the counter, like Ipran, etc. So we worked with these players on data marketing, sales optimization, and all the more specialized marketing activities that are really at the heart of Artefact's DNA. And then we actually shifted more towards the pharma branches of these companies, especially thanks to our strengths. So we really capitalized on our strengths, which are sales and marketing, to also be able to support these players in optimizing their commercial model. So here we were more focused on B2B compared to, of course, consumer health products, which are more B2C. So we started with everything related to sales and marketing. We really built a reputation, a name for ourselves in the industry based on this expertise. Also thanks to our expertise in data governance. So we truly supported these players who have a very rich and very siloed data heritage in improving the quality of their data assets and making their data more accessible. We really started by focusing on our strengths, and then as a result, all these experiences allowed us to gain maturity in the business processes specifically related to the pharmaceutical industry, especially in terms of their cross-functional data knowledge. And it also allowed us to expand into other parts of the value chain, notably everything related to R&D, for example, as well as industry, supply chain, and then all the support functions, finance, HR, etc. Today, we truly support them end-to-end in their data transformation across their entire value chain and with the full range of Artefact's offerings.
And for you, what specifically and genuinely motivates you to dedicate your valuable time and effort to working within this particular and ever-evolving industry?
Several things. First of all, it's an industry that is meaningful, and I think that's very important, both personally and for Artefact. We see that it's an industry that allows us to attract many talents to Artefact and also to retain them, because people are happy to work in the healthcare industry. Sometimes we work to improve research on rare diseases. We work to reduce everything related to drug shortages. So I think there are some important challenges involved, which at least for me are key. So that's very important. It's also an industry that's growing, which is doing relatively well globally today. So there's a lot of momentum, a lot of very interesting projects to work on. And then it's an industry that produces an enormous amount of data. For example, a hospital generates the equivalent of 116 million photos per day in terms of data volume. So it's colossal. And for us who work with data at Artefact, it's our job. It represents a huge number of opportunities, a huge number of projects, a huge number of things to do. And this applies to fields as varied as R&D and research. There's also a significant industrial apparatus, so everything related to optimizing the supply chain and industrial operations. Thank you. Even more projects to develop, and of course, everything related to sales optimization. So, I mean, it's very rich in terms of the range of projects that can actually be carried out within this industry. So it's something that's definitely very motivating. So today, the healthcare industry represents about 12% of our activities, and it's definitely expected to grow quite significantly in the coming years.
As you mentioned, there's a wide range of interventions you can carry out, a variety of topics, but what would you say are the main challenges facing healthcare today with the advent of new artificial intelligence technologies?
There's already a major issue when it comes to research and development. Overall, these are processes that are very lengthy today. So generally speaking, to bring a drug to market, it takes about 15 years. So we're talking about very long timelines. These are timeframes that are still extremely significant. It costs an enormous amount of money. Today, it costs pharmaceutical companies several billion euros to develop a new drug. There's a real challenge in reducing these cycles. And all pharmaceutical companies are indeed looking at how they can leverage new technologies today to reduce these very long cycles. So at Artefact, we really support our clients in this endeavor by trying to identify where along this R&D chain, AI can bring value to help reduce these cycles. So, for example, what does it mean to search for a new drug? It's the discovery of a molecule which represents the drug and a target, meaning a place in the human body where this molecule will be able to attach itself. And so, for example, all this work takes time. It's the entire research process, and there's a real challenge in discovering what the right targets are that molecules will be able to attach to and making sure that these targets are safe. So we start with target assessment, safety assessment. So making sure that we can, in a fairly reliable and safe way, work on that target. So, for example, we support researchers in this process of target safety assessment. How do they traditionally do it? They rely on all the available scientific literature. So there's a lot of work involved indeed in reviewing scientific papers, reading through all these documents to try to determine whether in the past there have already been side effects or any effects identified from interacting with that target in order to decide whether or not it's the right target. What we do is simplify all this documentary research work. So we created an assistant that we actually put in the hands of researchers, which allows them to screen, a tool that screens a database containing more than 7 million scientific articles and extracts the relevant information about the target being analyzed. So this greatly simplifies the whole process. This means we gain more than 30% efficiency in the target safety assessment process for researchers. So that's a pretty clear and interesting example. Another topic as well. So here we were more focused on the research aspect, at least the beginning of the cycle, but on the clinical side. So, once we've found a drug and a drug we potentially want to test, we have to test it. It has to be tested first on animals, and then it has to be tested on humans. All these clinical trial processes are now extremely regulated by a considerable amount of regulatory procedures to implement, which is perfectly normal, and there are a lot of reports to write. And we also help because these reports are very time-consuming to write manually and are often structured in the same way. We also assist throughout the entire process of what we call medical writing, the actual medical drafting of these reports, to try through generative AI to generate them automatically. For those working in the industry, we're talking about clinical trial reports, investigator brochures, and so on. Here, it's the same. It's an assistant that, based on documents identified by experts in pharmaceutical laboratories, can screen the entire document base and generate content automatically. These reports meaning both their structure and their content. So this also allows for a huge amount of time to be saved. We're talking about more than 50% of the time that used to be spent drafting these reports can now be optimized thanks to this tool. Here I just gave you 2 examples related to R&D, which are quite emblematic of what we can do today to work with our clients on this major challenge of reducing research and development cycles.
Those are the challenges for the R&D side. Are there other areas in healthcare that are facing similar challenges?
For example, perhaps you've encountered this yourselves, but drug shortages, which now affects a large portion of French citizens and even people internationally. We saw this last year with bronchiolitis in babies and also with insulin, which is often subject to shortages. So here as well, AI can help. And data, more broadly, can provide significant structural support to pharmaceutical companies in managing their inventories. Indeed, the goal is to try to avoid this issue of stockouts and consequently drug shortages. That's what we're trying to do. Of course, there are other reasons as well. Shortages are not only related to supply chain issues, but still it's one of the causes. This is the main area where we can make an impact. How? First of all, there is the challenge of gaining visibility over inventory. In fact, as I mentioned earlier, we realize that the pharmaceutical industry is one that generates a huge amount of data but doesn't necessarily know how to govern or manage it. That is to say, they don't necessarily have visibility over this data. Today, for example, we support several clients who have warehouses all over the world and who currently struggle to effectively track their inventory, their stock movements, and who have difficulty visualizing their inventory at a given moment in a specific warehouse. Data can already help with that. Quite simply, being able to visualize the stock level for a given product at a given moment and therefore have better control over those stock levels. For example, for a client we support, we built what we called a supply chain data platform, where the goal was indeed to collect all the stock data gathered by different ERPs, because unfortunately it would be too simple if there were just a single tool that centralized all this data. Often there are multiple tools used, for example, one tool per production site. So here we collect all that data. And the goal was indeed for a given product to be able to visualize stock levels across the entire chain end to end. So, for example, this made it possible to know at what point for a given product we were entering what we call a critical stock volume, meaning below a certain threshold. We know that puts us at risk regarding the supply for a given product and potentially be able to correct the course. So we're really working on these topics. So here I'm first talking about visibility, but then there's another topic we can go further with demand forecasting, which is another key and major use case for artificial intelligence in all this work around stock management. And what's also interesting from a consulting perspective is that it concerns many stakeholders. It concerns industry, it concerns sales, it concerns finance. So we're also really working on trying to align these different perspectives in order to actually build a demand planning tool that is reliable and robust. So that's everything related to the supply chain and disruptions, let's say. Next, in the industrial sector, there is a huge amount to do, just as in other sectors, especially on the production side. So with everything related to how we can potentially equip today's pharmaceutical production plants with sensors in order to actually collect data from the various machines that produce the medications and, for example, to implement predictive maintenance to also try to anticipate issues that could arise on the production line. So these are also exciting use cases that we can implement.
And so what obstacles do you encounter in this sector?
Well, the main obstacles today, I think, are quite similar for the most part to those in other sectors and industries. First of all, there's the whole issue around data quality, data collection, and the structuring of the data assets. As I mentioned, these are systems that are often very old, especially in areas like R&D, for example. IT transformations take an enormous amount of time. They don't follow the same roadmaps as AI projects. So often there's a bit of a disconnect between IT transformations and AI transformations. And so as a result, we really need to work on collecting and improving the quality of this data asset, which is often very scattered and siloed. So that's a real challenge and issue that we face with basically all our clients. The second challenge I see is indeed the whole issue of culture. Indeed, and it's also part of our job at Artefact to support the transformation of business processes and to help shift mindsets around these topics. And it's true that we're dealing with industries today that started their transformation a bit later than others and that still don't all have the necessary talent. data, AI with skills in data, AI, digital, and so on. So there's this challenge of driving cultural change to implement new ways of working in a much more cross-functional way as well, in collaboration with business teams. And it's also a transformation, as I mentioned, of the profession itself, which is new to these topics. So the whole issue of training is a major challenge here. Some pharmaceutical companies have already truly made the shift, but that's not the case for all of them. And then the last challenge I see is indeed the whole issue of data sharing. We've talked a lot about the pharmaceutical industry. I think there is indeed a significant challenge in terms of collaboration across the entire ecosystem, especially with public stakeholders, with hospitals, and of course with public institutions. And so the challenge is to see how, while of course respecting patient data confidentiality, we can manage to better share this data for the benefit of public research. So how, and here there are plenty of technologies. The answer isn't just technological, it's also very much about collaboration and business processes between these different entities. But technology also needs to keep up in order to truly allow these stakeholders to share their data with full confidentiality. There are some interesting technologies emerging here, such as what are called clean rooms, for example. These allow each stakeholder to share their data and work on common databases, all while preserving patient confidentiality and also maintaining data ownership. That is, each stakeholder remains the owner of their own data and is able to track all actions performed on the data by the different parties. We're seeing more and more consortiums emerging, which is definitely a positive sign. There's the Health Data Hub in particular, which also aims to position itself as a player that specifically connects social security data with data from other industry stakeholders. And not just that, other consortiums are being created as well to help break down these data silos. So that's also one of the major challenges I see.
We've talked a lot about AI ethics on this podcast. I imagine that in the healthcare sector, you're particularly focused on this topic. How does that play out?
It actually plays out on several levels. I think the first issue is everything related to infrastructure, if I start with the foundational layers, data confidentiality. We often work with infrastructures that are certified to be able to receive and host health data. So indeed, these are what we call HDS infrastructures. These are dedicated infrastructures that can therefore host this type of data. That's mainly how it takes shape. So on the infrastructure side, that's already a key point. Then, of course, there's the aspect of anonymization and pseudonymization of data. So today we work exclusively, at least when dealing with patient data, on data that is anonymized or pseudonymized. In fact, more and more players are getting involved in these areas. Startups are also entering this field, exploring how we can generate synthetic data, especially to avoid working directly with patient data. For example, I can mention a technology called Artefact, which makes this possible. That is how we can actually generate fake patient data based on non-existent records, which helps preserve confidentiality and, of course, addresses the ethical concerns you mentioned. And then I talked about infrastructures, I talked about anonymization. The last topic, for example, concerns generative AI. For us, there is always human oversight in the loop. I think this is something very important across the entire industry. Today, we're not talking about generative AI to replace healthcare professionals or to replace an essential link in the chain. It's always as a complement to humans, and it's more about augmenting humans than replacing them. So that's something the industry is very much aligned on. What's also interesting is to look at the other side a bit. For example, data and AI can also really help the industry when it comes to ethics. For instance, today there's a lot of talk about a synthetic control arm. I don't know if you've heard about it. When setting up a clinical trial, as I mentioned earlier regarding R&D challenges, we test a drug on a population of patients. The idea is, for example, if we take cancer, we're going to test a new treatment that aims to give hope to people who had none left. A new treatment that could potentially treat incurable cancers. We give the drug to a portion of the population. To one part of the group, and to the other group, we give a placebo. Today, there is still the issue of giving a placebo to people who are potentially terminal when this is their last chance to survive. So here, for example, AI, while we can certainly see AI as something to be feared, as a threat, we also need to see it as a source of hope, to consider how in the future we might actually replace these control arms, these groups receiving placebos, with synthetic control arms. So in other words, generating fake data that would actually allow us to simulate this placebo group and therefore no longer have to give these pills to people who are currently ill. So I think there are also some great opportunities here to support the sector in addressing these challenges.
The core business of Artefact at its foundation is still marketing. Are there also marketing topics in the healthcare industry?
Of course. We are currently being consulted a lot on all marketing topics, mix and modeling, whose goal is really to identify the impact of each marketing lever on sales. This is all the more important in pharma because it's a use case that really exists in every industry since access. Indeed, it's very difficult to link sales data, the prescription data provided by third parties, to marketing activity data. So today, making this connection is almost impossible. That's why these kinds of projects are so important, to be able to give recommendations to marketing teams on how they should build their budgets and where they should invest. So that's very important. For example, with this kind of analysis, we're able to say that today we see the impact of digital is significant on sales. In any case, it's currently underinvested. That is to say, in the pharmaceutical industry, there is a tendency to invest mainly in field sales forces. You know, the well-known medical representatives who visit healthcare professionals and pharmacies to promote the laboratory's medicines. A large investment is made in these areas. Except that today, the challenges for pharmaceutical companies also include operational efficiency. Today, what they generally aim to do is to bring new drugs and new indications to the market without necessarily increasing the number of their medical representatives. So it's a matter of deficiency. So we are often consulted on how to achieve more with the same number of medical representatives. So, for example, it's a matter of seeing whether we have reached saturation in a given network today. That is to say, asking ourselves if adding one more medical representative will actually bring us significantly more sales. In fact, what we often realize is that, well, no. Through these analyses, we realize that for certain products, for certain indications, we have reached saturation on this channel, which is the physical sales force. In other words, even if we added more medical representatives, it wouldn't bring in more sales. But on the other hand, we are indeed underinvesting in digital. That means we can still invest heavily in order to reach saturation. In other words, any incremental investment in digital could generate incremental sales. And these analyses become even more interesting when we combine the impact of different channels. What is the combined impact of digital and field forces? We're also being increasingly asked about medical marketing, mix modeling. So as you know, the pharmaceutical industry relies on field sales forces, but they also have a whole range of activities that aren't sales, what we call medical, which are actually also field teams who visit doctors but who don't talk about the products. Instead, they discuss the molecules themselves, share scientific expertise, and talk about their scientific experience. And we also face the challenge of being able to measure the impact of these teams, who are called medical science liaisons or MSLs, not on sales because that's prohibited for compliance reasons, but on other indicators such as the company's reputation, that sort of thing. In any case, we're working a lot on this particular use case, which is the MMM use case. There are also major challenges regarding how we can support the sales force in carrying out medical visits, how we can help them properly prepare for their visits, and also help them get a 360-degree view of the interactions the doctor may have had with the company. For example, digital engagements, emails received from the marketing teams, or conferences they may have attended. Today, all these teams really work in silos, and trying to figure out how we can get them to work together to have a 360-degree view of the interactions of the doctor with the company, and also how we can provide them with recommendations. Recommendations on how to continue engaging with a given doctor for a specific medical visit. For example, there are doctors who are much more sensitive to the effectiveness of the medication. Others who will be much more sensitive to the drug's tolerance. Some will be very sensitive to what their peers are doing. For others, that will be less the case. So how do we actually manage to properly tailor the message so that it brings the most value to the doctor? So that's what we're working on. And these are often what we call recommendation engines that are directly integrated into the tools used by medical representatives and which really help support them in this task during their medical visits. So those are two major use cases I see in the marketing field. There are others, of course, but those are two major ones that we often encounter.
And how do you see your sector evolving in the coming years?
As for Artefact and our challenges, I think we now have very strong representation in everything related to the pharmaceutical industry. We have about 20 clients today on a global scale in this industry. We have a challenge, a strong desire, first to continue growing this segment, especially internationally, so that's a major focus. And above all, to expand into other segments of the healthcare industry, particularly hospitals, the hospital sector, private clinics, etc., where there are also major issues, notably around democratizing access to care and how we can support healthcare staff as well, and also make their working conditions easier. So there's a lot to be done with data and AI in this market segment as well. And it's also our intention to gradually move closer to that. So that's where we're starting. We've invested a lot this year in everything related to the public sector, and we hope to have the opportunity to work on these topics in the coming years.
Is there a topic we haven't discussed yet that's particularly important to you?
Well, I think we've covered quite a few topics, but maybe, yes, one topic is definitely the talents at Artefact who work on these issues in the healthcare industry. So first of all, thanks to them, because I think in 4 or 5 years, we've really developed significant expertise in the sector. It's something that's very important to us, and I think it's also been a long-term effort. It's the development of this industry expertise. At Artefact, our core talents are in data and AI, engineers and consultants who are all specialized in these areas. That's our value, the fact that we're a pure player in data and AI. But in addition, in order to truly deliver value to our clients, we also had to significantly build up our expertise in all the industry-specific knowledge related to the field, which is highly specialized and specific. And so today we have around 150 people globally who are truly specialized in these data and AI challenges in healthcare. And I think that's really something that holds a lot of value. So it's a real challenge, let's say, of understanding the business context, of knowing the business processes. So I also wanted to highlight this team, which has done a lot of work to actually reach this level of expertise.
To wrap up, Justine, do you have a recommendation you'd like to share with us? A book, a show, or an article to dig deeper into the topic of AI and health?
Maybe to follow up on what I just said about the importance of building expertise in professional fields. There's a book that my team and I really like. It's a book called Demystify Pharma, which really gives you a good overview of the industry's challenges in a way that's quite concise and synthesized, yet still allows you to get a fairly specific understanding of the issues. So that's an interesting book. And otherwise, to keep up with the latest news in the industry, personally, I'm subscribed to the TIEC Pharma newsletter, which is French, but still does a great job of summarizing everything that's happening in the industry. And also the Fierce Pharma website, which goes a bit further on these current industry topics on a global scale, but also gives you a good overview.
Justine, thank you very much.
Thank you.
I hope you enjoyed this episode. We'll see you very soon for a new episode of The Bridge.